If you've been following the podcast for any length of time, you might remember that I assign themes to each of my years. Last year was the year of resolve. I've had the year of output, where I focus on writing a ton. I've had the year of Dory, where I focus on just keep writing, just keep writing. Well, this year is my year of collaboration. Because, teaming up with other composers, it doesn't just lighten the workload, it also pushes you creatively. It can fill in the gaps in your own skill set and can even get your music placed in libraries that otherwise you wouldn't have access to at all. Because in the end, the right collaborator can take your cues to the next level. But, and this is a big one, collaborating really only works when it's done right. I mean, if the roles aren't clear, if communication breaks down, or if egos get in the way, a really great opportunity can turn into a frustrating mess. So today, we're going to be breaking down 7 keys to a successful collaboration, because working with others can be a real game changer, or if it's not done right, it can turn into a real nightmare. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Kropf, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, where each week we are talking about all things production and library music. So whether you're just starting out or maybe you're already getting your cues on TV, I promise you, you are absolutely in the right place. Now, today's episode is made possible thanks to the support of our member subscribers of 52 Cues, who are composers just like you, working to write better cues and find success in the sync music industry. And 52 Cues is there to help make that happen with live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, pitching to real music libraries, and a ton more. So if you're curious about joining us, you can head over to 52cues.com or just, stick around, because I'm going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. Speaking of today's episode, we are breaking down my 7 keys to successful collaborations, with the understanding that this is something that I personally am working to get better at. Plus, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on a melancholy tension cue written by 52 Cues member Phillippe Pelateri. But first, what have I been working on lately? Man, I'm putting to bed, hopefully, well, it has to be this week, because I have to deliver my final stems and cut downs and everything for this modern comedy album that I've been working on. And just, you get to the end of these albums and it's a little bittersweet, because on one hand, you really enjoy writing them, but on the other hand, you're ready to be done with it. And so by the time I get, 10 cues into an album, I feel like I have said my piece, counted to 3, and I am ready to move on with my life. But first, let's take a quick listen to my penultimate. I don't think this is the last one. I think this is cue number 9. Modern comedy. This is a cue called Divorce to be Reckoned With. So that was Divorce to be Reckoned With, which is, again, a modern comedy cue written for Warner Brothers Discovery. And I've got to admit, it's a little bittersweet. You know, on one hand, I'm kind of sad to see that album be done, but on the other hand, I'm kind of tapped out, and I'll be happy to be able to move on to other types of cues. For you family and friends subscribers, be sure to tune in over in the cue review section, or I'm sorry, the cue breakdown section. I'm going to be doing a complete breakdown of Divorce to be Reckoned With here coming up really soon. So let's talk about today's topic. You know, collaboration really is one of the best ways to grow as a production music composer. It opens up all kinds of doors, it expands our skill sets, and connects us with opportunities we might not have ever really had on our own. But, you know, collaboration isn't just about splitting up the work. It's really about trust, you know, it's about being reliable. It's about knowing when to stand your ground about a creative choice and when to let go of an idea for the betterment of the whole cue. Because when collaboration works, it really is magic. The cue comes together, it comes together faster, it sounds better, and both composers walk away feeling like they're getting the better end of the deal. And I think that is the mark of a really great collaboration. But when it doesn't work, I mean, it's a frustrating, disorganized mess that can not only burn bridges, it can torch real friendships. So today, we're going to be talking about collaboration, about what makes a collaboration work. We're going to cover everything from communication and defining roles to handling feedback, meeting deadlines, and making sure you don't burn those very bridges you're standing on over things like split percentages or even creative differences. Because if you get these things right, you'll be the kind of composer people want to work with. And I think that's a key to a long-term career. So let's go ahead and let's jump into it. Point number 1, talk things out. You want clear and open communication. Yes, the first key to a successful collaboration is communication. And I know that seems obvious, but I think you'd be surprised how many projects fall apart simply because they don't take the time to talk things through at the start. Maybe they just assume everybody knows the deal. But communication leads to missed deadlines. It can lead to confusion over who's doing what and frustration on both sides. So before you ever write a single note, before you send a file, you and your collaborator need to be on the same page about expectations, workflows, and logistics. Because if you don't set that foundation early, even small misunderstandings can absolutely explode into major headaches. So what kind of things should you discuss? Well, first, and it seems kind of obvious, where is this going? What's the creative direction? You know, what style are we dealing with? What instruments, moods, structure? What should we do with the cue? And are we both working from the same reference track? Are we figuring it out as we go? And if you're writing for a specific brief, let's make sure that you both actually understand what's being asked. And then we get into, revisions, like how many rounds of feedback are expected? Are we tweaking as we go, or are we really working in different phases? Here's my cue, or here's my session and your session, and kind of going back and forth. And who has the final say? What if there's a disagreement? Who gets to be right? And then there's deadlines, like when's the first draft due? When does everything need to be finalized? When do we need to get things to the publisher? Is there a hard deadline? When are the deliverables? And if there's not a hard deadline, are we just working at our own pace? Or is the deadline really kind of floaty and out there? Because the last thing we want to do is to be scrambling at the last minute because nobody really set a due date. And then people get frustrated, they get hurt, maybe they get resentful, and things start falling apart a little bit. And like I mentioned, there are the delivery formats. What does this final package need to include? Are we delivering stems and alt mixes and full mixes? And whose job is that? Are there specific formatting requirements for the library or for the publisher? Because you don't want to turn in your queue only to find out that you're like missing half of the deliverables. And if we are, whose responsibility is it to iron all that stuff out? And once you figure that out, then you can talk about logistics. How are you handling file sharing? Do you guys have a mutual Google Drive or Dropbox or WeTransfer or some other way to share? Are you both using the same DAW or are we bouncing stems back and forth? I mean, if one of you is in Logic and the other one's in FL Studio, you got to work out your plan to transferring your files. And that's not a deal breaker. You're allowed to be in Logic and somebody else is allowed to be in FL Studio. But on the front end, you've got to talk about all of these details. You got to get it all communicated on the front end, maybe grab a Zoom or do a FaceTime call or something and hash out the details. Going back to deliverables, naming conventions, are we labeling things properly so that we don't end up with a folder full of like title, drums left, title, drums right, or is it just this big long string of things and then guitar, or is it just guitar 1 and guitar 2? I mean, we need to iron all of these things out, Having a structured file format keeps everything organized. It reduces friction and means that you can collaborate faster and much more effectively. And I know it might seem like a small thing, but trust me, when deadlines are staring you in the face and maybe things haven't been going as smoothly as you had hoped, a clean workflow can make a huge, huge difference. And while we're at it, let's talk about our communication. How are we staying in touch? Are we doing Zooms? Or are we shooting emails? Do you have my phone? Can we text each other? Are we using like Discord or Slack or WhatsApp or whatever? Some collaborators do prefer quick back and forth messages, while others might like email or voicemails or something like that. Whatever works, you just need to make sure that you're on the same page. And I'm not here to tell you how to necessarily do these things because we're all different and we all have our different modalities of input and output, how we communicate, how we give information, and how we want to receive information. But all of these details, file sharing, workflow, communication, they can create unnecessary friction if they're not worked out ahead of time. And that friction can slow everything down. So talk it out. Set your expectations early and make sure that everyone knows what's expected, what's needed, and how things are going to work. Because a little communication upfront saves a ton of headaches later. All right, number 2, know your role. Know your role. Define your responsibilities from the start. So the second key to a successful collaboration is knowing what's yours to do. Because I think that one of the biggest pitfalls in co-writing is not really necessarily having a clear understanding of who's responsible for what. When the roles aren't defined, then tasks can get duplicated, maybe details get overlooked, and then frustration can mount. And I've seen it happen, and I've been on the giving end of that, and I've been on the receiving end of that. You've got composers who are teaming up. They're super stoked to write together, but nobody's really kind of decided who's handling what aspect of the production, who's responsible for the mixing. And I don't think anybody is doing anything like nefarious or anything. It's just, we haven't necessarily defined these roles. I'm right in the middle of a collaboration with 2 other composers, and we made sure on the front end that here's what I am doing. I'm providing drums, and I can mix those drums for you, but I'm not necessarily doing the deliverables. I'm not doing the metadata. I'm not going to be doing the final mix, right? But if you don't iron those out, you're going to get people duplicating work. This person is like tweaking levels, adjusting EQs, but before you know it, we've got 2 different versions of the same cue. Nobody really knows where it is, and is it finished? Is it not finished? I have found that the best collaborations happen when everyone plays to their strengths and responsibilities, and they are clearly defined up front. So before you even start writing, figure out who's doing what. And not just, I'm doing drums or I'm doing guitars, but who is handling the overall form? Or is everybody writing their own section? Is somebody handling I'm going to handle the hook and this person's going to handle the chord structure? Is one of you in charge of sound design elements, but the other one's handling orchestration? That's kind of what's going on in the collaboration that I am doing right now. In fact, I have a text right now sitting right up there that I got this morning. One person's handling guitars and synths. The other person is handling orchestration, and I am doing drums and percussion. Right? So if the question is, who's programming drums? I am. But are we recording live instruments? Who is doing the synth layering? Who's responsible for that final mix and master? Because, let's be real. A cue isn't finished just because it's written. Somebody's got to export stems, and somebody's got to do all of the alt mixes and minus mixes and make sure that everything's hitting the library's formatting requirements and titling and metadata and entering it and delivering it. And if you don't decide up front, you're just setting yourself up for confusion later. And that can lead to frustration. I mentioned metadata. Somebody has to do that least fun part of the gig. Somebody has to do it. Somebody has to write descriptions. They have to do the keywords. They have to make sure that the composer IPI numbers and everything are all properly formatted. They have to submit the metadata in the form that the library is wanting. Is it a spreadsheet? Is it a PDF? Is it an online form? I don't know. And I know it's not the most glamorous part of the gig, but it's absolutely necessary. Can you divide and conquer some of that metadata? I don't know. But if you and your writer or writers don't decide who's handling it, it's not going to get done. And that can literally be the difference between a cue getting placed and a cue just getting ignored. Now, speaking of communication with the publisher and figuring out whose role is what, I would say that if only one of you has a relationship with the publisher, then they should be designated that point person for the communication. The last thing you want to do is both of you reaching out separately, submitting different versions or sending mixed signals about who owns what. It can be really, really weird, especially if the publisher doesn't know you. You're just a stranger to them, or you're just a name on a metadata form. But the composer who has the relationship should really take point on that. And then after the cues are published, then maybe you can hand off. I've gotten one of my publishers through a relationship that was built that started out as a collaboration. And then when the cue was done, I said, hey, I really, really enjoyed working on this with this other composer, and I just want you to know, I think I'm a great fit, and I would welcome any future opportunities. And fast forward, and here we are. And now I have a working relationship with that publisher that started as a collaboration. But what we can't have are the composers finish the cue, and now suddenly the publisher is getting multiple emails, different file names or mixes, and there's no explanation. The library gets confused, doesn't know which version to use and who is this dude. The cue gets rejected, but having one point of contact prevents that from happening. And even I would go even further to say that if more than one of you knows the publisher, designate one of you to kind of be that point person, and then maybe CC that person, the other composer, on the correspondence. That way they know who it is, and it's not just a complete stranger. Okay, now, beyond just dividing up tasks, a great collaboration usually combines superpowers. And this plays, again, into your roles. Because if you're a fantastic composer, but you struggle with mixing, then go find somebody who is a mixing ninja. If you're good at sound design, but you're not so good with the music theory, then let your collaborator handle that side of things. Instead of trying to do everything yourself, trust your collaborator to shine in their areas. That's when collaboration really starts working. One composer might be great at writing big string arrangements and the other one's really good at hybrid scoring. This is exactly what I'm doing with these other two composers, and by teaming up, we're creating a cue that really could we have pulled that off on our own? I mean, maybe, but isn't that when like 1 + 1 = more than 2? But for that to happen, everyone needs to know their roles, because if you don't, you're just going to end up wasting your time. You're going to overlap your work. You're probably going to frustrate each other in the process. And who ends up suffering the most? Well, the cue. So figure it out. Figure it out before you start. When everybody plays their part, then the cue gets finished faster, it sounds better, and most importantly, it's a pleasant experience. It's a worthwhile experience. It's a rewarding experience, and it just makes it fun. All right, so that's point number 2. Point number 3, stay flexible. If there's one constant in the production and music industry, it's change. I've done an episode. In fact, I think the second ever 52 Qs podcast episode was about how change is normal, right? It's normal for things not to stay the same. Deadlines shift around, creative direction evolves. We did a brief this past month, and we thought they were looking for vocal pop cues, and they didn't need those. And so a week into the brief, I'm like, I'm sorry guys, but they don't need this. I mean, things change. You might get feedback that comes with unexpected revisions. Successful composers, they don't fight these changes. No, instead, they embrace them, because the more adaptable you are, then the more valuable you become, not just as a composer, but as a collaborator. Things are going to change. That's just the nature of the gig. It could be that a library that needed your cue kind of whenever suddenly wants it now, wants it Friday. This also happened with that same brief. I followed up with the publisher and suddenly, the network has already gone into production, and so we've got to get them sooner. And so I had to shift everything around. And so you might have a music supervisor who reaches out with a revision request. And if you can't adjust quickly, you're going to miss out. You might have written a cue based off of a reference track, and you're told, actually, we need something a little bit different. These references that we gave you, that you've been studying for weeks, it's not really the direction that the producer ends up wanting to go, meaning like the television producer. So if you cling too tightly to your original idea, then you're just going to be frustrated a ton in this industry. But instead of seeing it as a setback, think of it, as just part of the job. That's just how it goes. And that's not even talking about actual feedback. You might think your cue is great, but the publisher asks for some kind of change, maybe a structural change, maybe instrumentation, maybe they just don't dig the mix. And honestly, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you agree with the publisher or not. That's not your job. Your job is to take the note and make the fix. And maybe you've spent hours, working on the cue, and it sounds great to you, but you're just told, no, it needs to be different. It's not right. Maybe instead of big and epic, now they want something kind of intimate and emotional, and you could get frustrated, and that would be completely understandable. Or you might just do the changes, give them what they're asking for, and move on. Because at the end of the day, they're the ones pitching your music, not you. They're the ones on the hook with their editors, with the music supervisors that they've spent a lot of time working on the relationship with, and they get to make the call. And collaboration is much smoother when you look to reduce the friction at every single stage. Don't get too attached to things. You've got to be able to work with the feedback. If you don't agree with it, Permission to, can I get the cone of safety? Have we talked about the cone of safety on the channel before? The cone of safety is basically, I'm going to say something which might sound kind of harsh, but it's coming from a place of love. So can I have the cone of safety? If you get feedback that you don't agree with, get over it. You just got to let it roll off of you. As you know, this isn't about like artistic expression. It's about writing music that works for the client, that works for the publisher. That's what we're doing here. You know, talking about collaboration, if something isn't working in your workflow, make the adjustment. You know, maybe your file sharing isn't really ironing things out. Maybe you've sent a bunch of bounce files, but really they could use the MIDI files because that would be much more efficient. Be willing to tweak your collaboration process. You know, the easier you are to work with, then the more people want to work with you. And we're going to talk more about this a little bit later when we talk about how you should be the kind of person that people want to work with. But for now, here's the key takeaway. The industry really does reward problem solvers, not problem makers. And you don't have to agree with every change. You just have to deliver. If you're resisting that change, that's going to lead to frustration. And if you're wasting time arguing instead of making progress, then you're just spinning your wheels. Missed opportunities that happen because you aren't willing to adjust. You're straining your relationships with your publishers. You're straining your relationships with your co-writers. But when you're flexible, then everything just runs smoother. Fact. And the best composers aren't just talented. They're adaptable. Okay, number 4. You have to be reliable. Your reputation depends on it. Yes, talent will get you noticed, but reliability will get you working, and it will keep you working. I mean, if people can't count on you to follow through, it doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how amazing you are at orchestral programming. If somebody can't depend on you to deliver, then eventually they're just going to move on to someone else. You know, you miss a deadline, maybe you don't answer your email, maybe you delay, maybe you leave their text on read, you know, maybe there's a last minute excuse, you know. These might all sound like really small things, but in a collaborative environment, they really add up. And before you know it, you've built a reputation as someone who's kind of flaky, maybe hard to reach, maybe just unreliable. And that, not only is that a collaboration killer, that can be a real career killer. So here's the deal. When you say yes, mean yes. If you agree to a deadline, you've got to hit it. And what if you don't have time? Well, if you don't have time, then say no before committing, not after the wheels start falling off the cart here. I mean, it's way better to be upfront than to back out later when people are depending on you. This is not the time to ask for forgiveness instead of permission. You know, if you say, yep, I've got the mix done by Tuesday, then you have got to get the mix done by Tuesday. If they need drum stems by Friday, then you've got to deliver. And I'm talking to myself here. This is and I've talked about this on the podcast before, this is my personal kryptonite: overcommitting and under-delivering, over-promising and under-delivering, you know? And I've talked about, you know, if you can't make the deadline, you got to be honest, but really you should be honest before you take the gig, you know? Because sometimes things happen. And if something unexpected comes up, you know, communicate as early as you can. Don't wait until the last minute, and definitely don't just go silent and hope it works out, right? Because here's the thing, deadlines just aren't about libraries and publishers. Our own internal deadlines, when we're collaborating, they matter just as much. You know, if you and your collaborator are on a date to deliver stems, you know, you agree to a date, then that's a deadline. You know, if you commit to like having a mix done at a certain time, yep, that's a deadline. You know, just because Nobody's breathing down your neck. That doesn't mean you can just kind of slack off on your commitments. You don't need the sword of Damocles in order to motivate you to hit your deadlines. Even small delays will add up, because if you're late and your collaborator, now you've just made an emergency for them. You've just created a fire drill and they are now having to rush because of you not hitting your deadline. And when that happens, the queue suffers, the relationship suffers. So try to treat every deadline with the same level of, dare I say, respect, whether it's for your client or for your own internal project. Again, don't ghost your co-writers, especially as deadlines are looming. If someone's waiting on you for a response, respond. Nobody expects, I don't think anybody expects like instant replies, but if deadlines are approaching, man, you can't just disappear. And if you do need more time, then say so on the front end. And if you're unavailable, then let them know instead of just going silent. And I understand, you go silent not because you're a complete monster. Usually it's because you feel bad. Or in my case, when I overpromise and underdeliver, I'm like, future Dave's going to work that out. Future Dave is going to figure out how to pull that off. Most of the time it works. Well, not every time. And that's when it absolutely bites me in the ass. And I hate it. I hate feeling that way. I hate the way it makes other people feel about me. I hate feeling untrustworthy. But okay, so what if you're missing deadlines because you're really not feeling it? Maybe you're second guessing the project. Maybe the queue isn't coming together. Well, you can't avoid the conversation, folks. You got to talk. You got to communicate. Because nothing is more frustrating than feeling like your collaborator has just totally gone silent. And look, I get it. Your collaborator is probably, I would say chances are, especially here in the 52 Qs community, they're probably your friend. They might be genuinely cool about you missing a deadline, but that doesn't mean you should, right? You don't want to take advantage of that goodwill because that is a finite resource that you could burn out, You don't want your delay to create a fire drill from then. And even if they don't complain, overtly to you, your actions could still be adding stress to their schedule. Heck, stress to their life. So you want to be reliable. You want to be reliable and dependable for your co-writer, just as you would a publisher. You want to respect their time. You want to meet the deadlines. You want to respond promptly. You want to keep the communication flowing because if you wouldn't do it to a client, don't do it to your collaborator. That could lead to missed deadlines, missed opportunities, rushed work, and even more tragically, strained relationships. It's going to make future collaborations way less likely. I have a potential collaboration that I was going to do with one of our family members. And I'm like, hey, yeah, I'll throw a Doombeck part on that, no problem. And yet, it's been a comically long amount of time. And I think about it all the time. Does he still need it? I don't know. To be honest, I'm kind of afraid to ask him about it. It's kind of turned into a running joke, but it should be noted that with the exception of one other track that I did play some drums on that got placed, and that's great, we really haven't worked together much since, and I would like that. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, and he's probably listening, he probably knows exactly what I'm talking about, and he's probably going to send me a message when he hears this, hopefully, telling me that I can assuage my own guilt, because that's what it is. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, oh man, if I hadn't dropped the ball with that Doombeck request, then we probably would be off to the races, So at the end of the day, you build stronger relationships with people you feel like you can trust. And trust happens when there is an open line of communication. You develop a relationship, a reputation of someone that people can count on, and that's going to lead to more work. We know that library music is a long game, and reputation absolutely matters. And in an industry where placements and opportunities come down to these relationships, then being known as someone who follows through is just as important as writing great cues. Okay, number 5. Kind of related to what we were talking about communication earlier, but I just want to touch on it again. And this is, you need to take and give feedback well, because this isn't personal. Don't take things personally. This is professional. This is partnership. I mean, feedback is inevitable in any kind of relationship, in any type of collaboration. No matter how good you think your cue is, your co-writer or a publisher or a music supervisor might hear something different. And they might hear something different on repeat listens. But your ability to take and give feedback professionally can mean the difference between smooth collaboration and a nightmare. Because here's the thing, we all have these musical ideas we fall in love with, but sometimes these sacred cows, these ideas that we refuse to let go of, are exactly what might be holding the cue back. Just because you love a certain aspect doesn't mean it's going to work for the cue. It might be musically interesting, but it also might be distracting. And if it is, then it's got to go. Even if you spent hours working on it, it could just not be right. And it sucks. It sucks to have to cut something that you really, really love and something that you feel passionately about. But the sobering question really needs to be is the cue better without it? And if the answer is yes, then you've got to let it go. But on the flip side, if something isn't working, you've got to give feedback with honest empathy. Let me say that again. If something isn't working, then you are hearing something, then you have to give feedback with honest empathy. It's not enough to just not like it, You have to be able to articulate why, and ideally, you should be offering a solution, because saying, I hate that, that's not helpful. But instead of saying man, I hate that snare sound, how about the snare feels too transient in the mix? Maybe we could kind of roll off the transients, maybe put an enveloper tool or something. Well, the goal is we need to give a path forward. Being specific about what is and isn't working. You want to phrase your feedback in a way that improves the cue rather than tearing down somebody's idea. And again, always, and I mean always, offer a solution instead of just pointing out the problem, because pointing out the problem is only half of what feedback actually is. If your co-writer adds something you don't dig, again, you can't just say, terrible, sucks, but offer a solution. It keeps the conversation constructive, and, at the end of the day, you're focused on making the cue better. But do remember, if you're going to give feedback, you got to be able to take it. Because just like you're going to have opinions on their ideas, they're going to have opinions on yours, and your flexibility and your ability to absorb that feedback and kind of metabolize that so that you can output something without it sticking on you, and taking it personally, then that's the real key. Think of it like this. When you get feedback, you have two options. Maybe it's feedback that you don't necessarily agree with, or it's stinging a little bit. All right, option number 1, you get super defensive and you really dig your heels in. And you're like, nope, you're wrong. Things start fraying. Option number 2, you listen. You consider their perspective and maybe you try to change it or try it. Just does it work before just automatically dismissing it? And honestly, even if you don't agree, try it anyway. You might just be surprised. You might send something to your co-writer and they're like, I'm not digging this. The mix is muddy or whatever. And you don't hear it that way. But instead of arguing, you tweak the mix, you send it back, you maybe work something, and then suddenly, wow, they were right. They have a point. And so you make the adjustment, and guess what? The cue gets better for it. Because if you start handling feedback poorly, if you start giving feedback poorly, then it's just going to lead to frustration. And if you're stubbornly holding on to the ideas that aren't working, you're just going to find yourself not wanting to work with that person anymore. But when you do handle the feedback well, not only does the cue become stronger, the process goes smoother, and you build a reputation as someone who's easy to work with, which leads to more opportunities. And at the end of the day, feedback isn't about being right. It's about making the cue the best it can be. And if you can give feedback constructively, receive it without ego, then you're not only going to create better music, you're going to build stronger, lasting relationships in the industry. All right, so that's point number 5. Point number 6, take care of your business. Get things in writing, keep it simple. Yes, creativity is at the heart of collaboration, but business and clarity in business is what keeps relationships strong and projects running smoothly. I mean, nothing's going to ruin a great relationship faster than confusion over money or ownership or responsibility. And yeah, I get it. Talking about splits and contracts and royalties, it's not the easiest part of the gig. It's definitely not the most exciting, but if you're skipping that step as you start collaborating, as you start working with folks, then friends, that is toxic to friendships. You might get placements that get lost, opportunities slip through the cracks. You don't feel comfortable with it. You're like, it feels inequitable. It starts feeling icky and resentful. So before you start writing, get it in writing. Make sure everyone is clear on who is getting what, who's getting the percentage, who's getting the splits. Are you both signing with the library, or is there only one person submitting on your behalf, or both? Do we have contracts with the library? Do we have a co-writing agreement? We've talked about already, who's talking to the publisher, who's handling the deliverables, all of those types of things. What we can't do is just assume that the co-writer's handling it only to find out they didn't necessarily do it. And hear me, it doesn't need to be like this complicated legal document. Most of the time, a simple email chain is just enough. If we're talking in the eyes of the court, if you send somebody an email saying, hey, let's collaborate, and then they email back and it's like, yep, I agree. Then I think if push came to legal shove, I think that would hold up. Just a super simple email, something like, hey, here's my understanding. We're going to be doing a 50-50 split. I'll handle the production. You handle the mix. I'm going to be submitting to the library. You go ahead and do the metadata. It's due on Friday. Let me know if that sounds good. And that's it. I think that, again, I'm not a lawyer, but that is demonstrating that there is clear communication. It doesn't necessarily have to be an actual agreement. I mean, one simple email can save a ton of drama later. And if you do want to go in deeper, if you do want to do a co-writer agreement, I actually covered this on a podcast episode several years ago, and I'll put a link here, then you can check that out if you haven't already. And once again, I'm not a lawyer, but it's there if you want to go deeper. So let's talk about splits. And my advice when it comes to ironing out royalty splits with your collaborator, and I'm just going to keep it simple for you. It's very simple. 50-50 solves so many problems. Even if the work isn't exactly split down the middle, a straight 50-50, it just keeps things kind of clean. It avoids resentment. It makes sure that everyone feels equally invested. And I've thought a lot about this, and I actually borrow a concept from like a band like Red Hot Chili Peppers. When they get together to write, they don't necessarily sit around thinking about like, who wrote which chord or who came up with the bass line and who wrote the lyrics, I came up with the drum part. They split everything evenly because they all contributed to the final project. The Red Hot Chili Peppers wouldn't be the totality of their sound without every single person in that band contributing to it. And the same is true with co-writing. Maybe you wrote the harmonic progression while your co-writer, maybe they handled the mix and the sound design. And even though the tasks were different, the cue flat out wouldn't exist without both of you. And I am living proof of this for just, last year, had the opportunity to submit to the NFL on CBS during the pregame show iVision segment. Okay, this is the segment where they show a clip and they put like all these video game graphics kind of underneath the players. It's called the iVision. And so we had an opportunity to submit to that. And I kind of wasn't going to do it. I didn't think I had enough time to do it. And so I was like, I'm going to let it go. But then somebody reached out to me and said, hey, would you want to collaborate? I'm like, what? Yeah, I think I could do, share the load, right? All of that stuff. And so he sent me like some synth stems that were really, really good. But then I layered on drums, percussion, sound design stuff, all of the orchestration. And so I just really made it into this huge thing. And if I were looking at like man hours, I guess it would technically be like unequal, but I don't even think of it that way, because the truth of the matter is I wasn't going to submit to that brief at all. But when he sent me those synth stems, it unlocked something creatively that turned into this like avalanche of output that literally would not have existed if he hadn't sent me those synth stems. So even though if I were to look at the track listing and count up like, I did this carry the 1 and 14 and he only did 3 and therefore he should get X number. No, I don't get into any of that. I don't argue about percentages. I just called it even and we moved on. Now, that having been said, if you really do feel like the workload isn't necessarily equal, here's what you don't do. Don't squabble over like 5 or 10%. Don't squabble over all these little details. You don't want to start nickel and diming your collaborator. And you definitely can't let it turn into a fight. Instead, if you are working with a collaborator and the split doesn't feel fair, then just say, hey, man, I might be too busy for this project, and just politely pass on it, because you don't want to torch a bridge over a few percentage points just because you're like, this isn't necessarily equal. That same collaborator that I worked with on a previous cue that introduced me to the other publisher, he did come to me, I guess about a year later, and said, here, Dave, here's some more ideas I had, and this is what I think it could kind of turn into. What do you think about this? And to be honest, not only was it a lot of work, I would have been doing the lion's share of the work, and I was honestly too busy. So I just politely passed on it. I didn't say like, dude, you're out of your effing mind. How dare you? I will take 75%, right? No, it's either 50-50 or it's a pass. And I just trust that, the universe has amazing plans, and I'm trusting that the next project might have different dynamics. And that same composer that gave me those synth stems that we turned up into iVision, he has since come back and we did a whole album of Latin pop cues. And he did a ton of work on it. I threw in some percussion stuff and did deliverables. And so I just have to believe that like it all kind of works out in the wash. But what I don't want to do is like ruin future opportunities over just a handful of percentage points, right? I am a firm believer that the best collaborations happen when both people feel like they're getting the better end of the deal. And if you're working with people that you trust, then like I said, I feel like the universe kind of has a way of working things out. You might do more heavy lifting on this cue, but on the next one, your co-writer is going to carry more of that load. So 50-50 or nothing. That's the way that I like to function. I believe it kind of leads into the strength of collaboration, which we are trying to get more placements for everybody in the long run. And when you handle your business side and you treat it as partners on this, like you wouldn't, if you were in a business partnership, like Shannon, my wife Shannon, Mrs. 52Q, she handles like the books, she handles the graphic design, she handles all the metadata stuff, but she's not like sitting in front of a camera. She's not doing Zoom sessions with students. But if I start like ticking off hours, like I'm punching in at Walmart, no disparagement to Walmart employees, I've definitely done my share of hourly retail employees, but no, that's not sustainable. So I believe that all of this is about handling your business in the right way. You want to be clear. You want to keep the focus on the music, not necessarily on legal disputes and your collaborations. You want them to feel fair. You want to be professional, but you want to be drama free. Okay. The relationships you build are going to impact your career, hopefully for years to come. So when you keep things fair and professional, it means that you're going to set yourself up for more work and better collaborations down the road. All right. Now, finally, if you're with me, thank you. Thanks for joining me. This is another long one, man. Anyway, point number 7, be a person that people want to work with. Because at the professional level that we're talking about, being good is baseline. It's standard. It's expected. Everyone at a certain level has great cues. Now, there might be different creative choices, but eventually you get to the point where libraries aren't returning your cues because they aren't right or there are errors. They are returning your cues because they just don't vibe with your choices. Because on a certain level, everyone knows how to write. Everyone knows how to produce. Everyone knows how to mix. So, okay, if everyone's talented, then what separates composers who keep getting work from the ones like with a hard drive of amazing yet unused cues? I have found that more often than not, this comes down to how much people just enjoy working with you. Talent will get you in the door, but it's your attitude that keeps you in the room. Libraries, music supervisors, co-writers, they're not just looking for good cues, they're looking for partners. They're looking for partners who are easy to work with. People who stay calm under pressure. When deadlines shift or revisions are needed, people who are reliable and responsive without needing to be chased for deliverables and poked, people who don't turn every inconvenience into a crisis, and people who can take directions without getting defensive. Because here's the truth. Anybody can learn to mix. There are so many YouTubers. I've even done my share of workshops and stuff on writing better cues. Anybody can get better at orchestration. Anybody can learn production. Anybody can learn sound design. But you want to know what's harder to teach? How to be a good collaborator, whether you're collaborating with a co-writer or partnering with a library. If you're somebody that people want to work with, then I believe you'll always have opportunities. So let's hypothetical. You've got 2 composers who have submitted equally strong cues for a very high profile placement. One of these composers, again, they are equally amazing cues, but one composer is maybe misses deadlines. Maybe they complain about revision requests, or maybe they have to be chased for their files. The other, however, is responsive. They're positive. They meet the deadlines. There's no drama. I mean, who would you rather work with? Being talented isn't enough. You got to be chill. You got to be professional, and you got to be a good hang. Even if it's just digitally, even if it's a good hang in email, Nobody wants to work with somebody who's like super high maintenance, easily frustrated, or overly dramatic. And I know that we all have our challenges, and there are struggles and there are, anxieties that come up. And I'm not saying you have to be perfect, but what you don't have to be is a people pleaser. You don't have to fake enthusiasm, but you do need to be somebody who can keep the energy positive, especially under tight deadlines, handle feedback without letting your ego get all up in it. You want to adapt quickly without turning every change into a debate. You do not, hear me folks, you don't have to defend your choices with somebody who gets to make the decisions. You don't have to defend them. And even when you do disagree, communicate clearly and respectfully. And if they still aren't down with it, then move on. Get over it. And so again, even remotely, even via Zoom or FaceTime or emails or whatever, vibe comes through. A simple "got it, thanks" in an email, a thoughtful response instead of just ghosting, being easy to reach, especially when deadlines are looming, being responsive on your text, not just leaving things on read. These types of things, they matter, because as big as the world seems, the industry itself is pretty small. And a lot of these publishers know each other. Word can travel pretty fast. And if you're difficult to work with, people, I think, are going to remember that. I think they're going to know it. And so when a library does reach out to two composers and one of them replies like, "Got it, I'll get something ready by tomorrow," but the other one just disappears and never responds or anything, guess who's going to get future opportunities? I mean, it's trust. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Can you be trusted to meet your deadlines? Can you be trusted to follow through on the things that you have committed to? Can you be trusted to communicate professionally and clearly? Because if you can't, friends, it doesn't matter how good your music is, because there's going to be another amazing, talented composer who will be easier to work with. And if you're difficult to work with, then you're going to get fewer opportunities. It's going to keep you from growing in the relationship, in the industry rather. And it's going to strain your relationships with your co-writers, with your clients, with your libraries. But when you are somebody that people want to work with, you're going to build stronger, long-term relationships with the people who are going to help your career grow naturally. You want to be a pleasure to work with. At the end of the day, in this industry, your reputation is one of your most valuable assets. So you want to work hard to guard that and protect it. So, collaboration. It's not just about splitting up work. It's about trust. It's about reliability. It's about making sure that working with you is a positive experience, because that's what's going to get you called back for the next gig. I mean, nobody wants to work with someone who's impossible to reach, always missing deadlines, or constantly pushing back on feedback. And yeah, we're human. We've all got egos, and we've all got schedules that get busy. We are all busy. But the composers who build these long-term careers in the industry that we are here to work on, they're the ones who stay flexible, stay professional, and stay easy to work with. Because at the professional level, good music is expected. But being someone that people actually want to collaborate with, that's what's going to set you apart. So if you're struggling with getting opportunities, ask yourself, is the issue my music, or is it the way I'm like working with others? Because in the end, your reputation is going to take you farther than any single cue will. But what do you think? Have you ever had a collaboration kind of fall apart because expectations weren't clear? Or maybe you worked with somebody who made the process so smooth that you couldn't wait to team up again. Also, what do you think is the biggest challenge when it comes to working with other composers? I would love to hear your thoughts. Please let me know in the comments below. And I do read all those comments, and I would love to hear from you. So we're going to take a super quick break, but when we return, we're going to be taking a listen to Don't Look Back, which is a melancholic tension cue from 52Q's community member, Phillippe Pelateri. We'll be right back. Every week I talk about how this episode and the podcast and the community, the channel, would not be possible without the amazing support of our family, friends, and neighbors, subscribers of 52Qs, who do pay their actual real-life money to keep all of this going. And in addition to being thriving members of the community, as well as supporting me and Shannon and everything that we're doing here, they also receive extra perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, hundreds and hundreds of hours of video archives, weekly Q breakdowns, production music almanac, living ebook, and the opportunities to submit to real music libraries. Now, it's free to join 52Qs. You can just go to 52qs.com and sign up, be a member of the community. We would love to have you. It will always be free to join the community. But if you've been watching, or if maybe this is your first time, but if you're wondering, is there a way to kind of level up my production music skills in the industry, meeting like-minded, super friendly, very generous composers? Then why don't you think about subscribing? Memberships start at around $4 a month, and we would love to have you. Again, that's 52qs.com. All right, so that was Don't Look Back by Phillippe Pelateri. Phil, thank you so much for sending this along. Phil sent this in our weekly feedback section where members of the 52Qs community can send cues for me to review here on the podcast. I did enjoy this. This opening was super evocative, right? We've got kind of a light tension type of thing, but it's almost melancholy. This feels kind of like, like rain. I like your harmonic choices here. And I thought your mix was actually pretty good here. But we have a couple of things that I think we should address. And the main issue that I find is I feel like we have different cues within the same cue, where we are, I call these like embarrassment of riches cues, right? There's so many really cool, interesting things happening within the cue, but it's creating an unmoored sense of what the mood and emotion is. And so my rule of thumb is, if I am building up my cue and, every phrase we're kind of building and we're adding intensity and all that kind of stuff, when I look to go to a new section, a B section, whether it's a breakdown or a B section or whatever, we have to be careful that we don't slip out of the mood and the emotion that the cue is looking to evoke. Because remember, production music editors and reality TV show editors or music supervisors or whatever, they are looking for a cue which communicates essentially, and for the most part, one mood or emotion. And we've talked about on the podcast how mood and emotion is governed by harmonic choices, instrumentation, and rhythmic choices. So when you are going into a new section, if your goal is to maintain one consistent mood or emotion throughout, then we have to make sure that as we are switching things up, that we're not switching things up too much. And so this first section right here, I feel like we are in danger of shifting out. And I want you to ask yourself, am I changing too much of the instrumentation? Am I making instrumental changes? Am I making harmonic changes? Am I making rhythmic changes? If you're doing just one of those things, so if you're just changing the instrumentation, but leaving the harmonic choices and the rhythmic choices pretty much in place, then there's a really good chance that you are going to stay in the same mood and emotion. If you change, let's say, the harmonic choices and the instrumentation, I've forgotten what I said. If you do two of those three things, then you're probably, it's 50-50 on whether you're actually changing the moods or the emotion. But if you change all three of those things, then it's almost a guarantee that you have slipped out of whatever mood and emotion you've got cooking. So if I look here, right, we've got kind of some, I don't know, got kind of a thin pad, we've got electric bass, we've got this really nice piano, this marimba thing happening, and then, all right, so we've kept some of the sounds, but we've introduced this really nice, cool sound, but it's dark. It's like, wow, right? It's really cool, but it's a new rhythmic element, and it's pretty new. It's pretty new textural change. All right, so we've got like kind of 2.5. We've kept the piano cooking. We're in good shape here. We are in danger, that having been said, we're in danger of kind of abandoning our piano hook, right? Our little motif that we've been riding with. And so now it's not what it was. And now, if memory serves me, we're about to make another shift. Okay, so we've gone from there to there pretty quickly. We're introducing a lot of new information, some harmonic shifts. We've got new sounds. We've got new rhythmic shifts. Now we're going into drums. And so we are pretty quickly, within the first 60 seconds, we've essentially got three sections, and it can create some emotional whiplash in the cue. And not just in the cue itself, but, imagine you're an editor and you basically only have and you love this. You're like, this is awesome. I really, really like this. But that's not working for my scene at all. And in this, that's kind of dark. There's like a dark growly sound. I don't think this feels like, people are breaking up, in a dating show. This feels kind of dark and there's almost a sense of danger here, but this is like totally somewhere else. And so your choices are, it's like, okay, so Dave, I just gave you some feedback, and now I can't just say, I don't think it's working. I have to suggest a fix. My recommendation would be to roll some of these things back. I would probably swap out the wow, that's really, really cool. And you could almost get away with it, but we can't abandon that. Yeah, I'm trying to find the parts. Okay, so we can roll some of these things back. We can lessen some of these elements which have changed, or we can sprinkle some of these elements in earlier. What we are doing is that we are giving context so that when we finally get to here, we have kind of gotten some of those elements before. Like right here, maybe we introduce the boom, 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 boom. Maybe it's not the fully realized element, but maybe here after the first phrase, boom, 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 hold, 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 and then boom, 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 boom. And so now, and boom, 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 boom. Right, we've contextualized this pretty intense shift from where we thought we were for like the first 30 seconds. We've contextualized it, and we have created a smoother on-ramp to where we are going to end up, if that makes sense. I'm getting kind of synthwave vibes. I'm not sure about the orchestral glockenspiel on this one. There's a boom, wonk, 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 wonk. And so now we're kind of returning to this. And so I'm not sure now that this section necessarily feels. I'm not sure it feels like it belongs. Another thing that I would probably shift is we're bringing kind of acoustic drums to the table here. I think the drums need to be much more processed, either with, more exaggerated, maybe delays or reverbs. It just needs to sound like the drums are affected more, as opposed to like somebody brought an acoustic drum set to all of these really cool, really evocative, like the piano and the synths and everything and the pulses and everything, and then like dude on a drum set. Whereas if we brought, like I said, reverby type drums or even glitchy drums and that kind of thing, I think that could be effective. See, I really like the I like that. And the more I think about it, the more I think we should seed that pulse in earlier. Yeah, so we never go back to this kind of uplifting moment. Honestly, I think we could probably ditch the whole thing. I'm gonna see if I can't do that kind of in real time. We're gonna line this up here. All right, there's that bar 17. It goes to bar 25. All right, let's see what it sounds like just skipping over that. Oh, this is what is up. All right, obviously you want to fix it with like a sweep. Yes. Hear how that's just like super brooding? I would probably chill out those. I mean, my point still stands about the drum set, but that kind of feels like a breakdown. I would keep it broken down even more. Just really spend some time there, and then pull it louder, because the last note that I have is this feels a little samey kind of throughout. There's not, once we hit the other side of that B section, we kind of hit an altitude, and then we just hit kind of cruising altitude. And I forget who, there's a YouTuber or a podcaster Sync Beast, I think, talks about like flying, and so you have like lift off and then you have like kind of different levels of altitude and everything. By the way, I haven't seen Sync Beast in a while. I don't know, maybe. Anyway, and so I feel like we hit kind of like, 30,000 feet and then we just stayed there. And so in general, we either need to be completely ascending or descending. We don't want to just kind of plateau. And I feel like we're kind of plateauing here to the end. And I think a more solid button ending here. Boom. And this does feel a little bit long to me here. I think you could probably get away with shaving off a lot of this. Let me see how that sounds like. Let's do 2 beats. So we're going to go 1, 2, and then release. So that's going to sound something more like this. Downbeat, 1, and then it ends. Yeah. We don't need a whole other, 3 or 4 seconds of that ring out or that sustained note. But Phil, thank you so much for sending this along. I really do appreciate that. And you know what? If you would like to get your cues reviewed right here on the podcast, you can submit them into our weekly feedback threads over at 52 Cues community. Not only is it a great way to get insights from fellow composers, but you never know, I just might feature your cue right here on the podcast in a future video or a future episode. And if you're looking for something maybe a little bit more in depth, I also offer 15-minute video reviews where I go through your cue, talk about what's working, and suggest way for you to make it even stronger, or suggest ways, I should say. You can order one up by heading over to 52cues.com/feedback. And if you also would like to get this type of feedback on the regular, if you are writing consistently, we actually do this every single week for our family subscribers. All right. So we would love to have you. But, that's going to do it for me this week. Be sure to tune in next week because we're going to be talking about something that I see a lot of composers struggle with, and that is using loops, but in a way that not only isn't going to get all tripped up by content ID and everything, but actually feels creative because, I think loops can be really great. They can save time, they can add a ton of texture, and sometimes, they can be exactly what a cue needs. But, just dragging and dropping a bunch of loops around, that's not really composing if we're being honest, right? It's cool and it's important, but it's not really what we want to be doing. So next week, I'm going to be talking about strategies for manipulating and layering and using loops as part of our production process. We're going to talk about how to mix them, how you can make them stand out, how you can turn them into something unique so that your cues can sound better. We can do some things quicker, but we're going to make sure that we're not just doing, stock music collage. But, I also want to thank you for spending part of your day here with me. I know there are a ton of options out there. So the fact that you chose to hang out with me really does mean a lot. And if you got a lot of value out of today's episode, the best way you can pay it forward is to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Because believe it or not, that really does help composers just like you find the podcast. So I hope you've had an amazing week. And you know what? I'm confident that you're going to have an amazing week ahead. How do I know that? Because I trust and believe that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52 Cues podcast is copyright 2025 818 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community, submitting your cue for review, or becoming a member subscriber of 52 Cues, head over to 52cues.com.